All right, today we are diving into something really different. We're not just exploring another theory about the universe, we're cracking open a case file. We're going deep into a document that puts the entire 13.8 billion year model of the cosmos on trial, laying out what it calls a forensic audit that argues for a history of everything that is just radically different. Okay, so let's get right into it. The source material here doesn't even pretend to be a regular scientific paper. No, it's framed as a classified case file, a forensic audit. And its opening shot is a big one. It calls the entire consensus view of cosmology a metaphysical hallucination. And there you have it. That's the core accusation, the absolute heart of this entire audit. The argument we're about to unpack is that the age of the universe isn't some settled fact we discovered, but a number that comes from what the document calls a broken yardstick. This really sets the stage for a complete teardown and reevaluation of all the evidence.
To really get what this audit is saying, we first have to understand the crime it claims has been committed. The document argues that this whole conflict we see, it all comes from a fundamental misrepresentation of what science can actually do and what it can't. Now, this is really interesting. The audit basically splits science in two. You've got operational science on one side, that's your repeatable, testable lab experiments. But then you have historical science on the other, which is trying to figure out a one-time event in the distant past. The document calls this a mathematically degenerate problem, basically a form of reverse storytelling, where you're forced to just invent the starting point. And to mix these two up, it alleges, is nothing short of a fraudulent bait and switch.
So, with that framework established, let's move to the prosecution's case. The audit now starts laying out a series of exhibits, each one designed to systematically dismantle the pillars of the standard cosmological model, piece by agonizing piece.
And the first piece of evidence, wow, it is a staggering accusation. It flat out labels the standard model a metaphysical Ponzi scheme. The argument is that to keep the whole thing from collapsing mathematically, scientists had to invent a dark sector, dark matter and dark energy. The audit just calls them secular ghosts that supposedly make up 95% of all reality. And this chart just illustrates the point perfectly. The claim is that the stuff we can actually see, touch, and measure is only 5% of what the model needs to even work. The audit argues that a 95% fudge factor would get you indicted for fraud in literally any other field. But then it goes further and reframes this dark sector, not as matter at all, but as the gravitational echoes of what it calls Sublime Sefiros, these divine emanations from Kabbalistic thought, just cascading into our dimension from a higher reality.
Okay, on to Exhibit B, which the audit calls the secular deus ex machina. See, the Big Bang had a fatal problem, a contradiction called the horizon problem. So cosmic inflation was invented to solve it. The document frames this as a totally supernatural, law-breaking event that's conjured up to save the theory. It's a miracle, which the document points out an atheist is perfectly happy to believe in as long as there's no miracle maker. Now we get to Exhibit C, which is just this rapid-fire assault on the physical evidence for deep time. It claims radiometric dating is just fundamentally broken, pointing to weird paradoxes in helium and argon. It says there's circular reasoning going on, where fossils are used to date rock layers that then are used to date other fossils. And then it points to today's problems, like the Hubble tension and the James Webb telescope finding these impossibly mature galaxies, as proof that the whole model is actively failing right now in real time. So, if the audit claims the physical crime scene is contaminated and the models are all built on a massive fudge factor, where does that possibly leave us? Well, this is where the case pivots, and I mean dramatically. We're moving out of the laboratory and straight into the courtroom. And this brings us to the absolute core question of the whole document. If your calculations based on physical laws lead you to contradictions and require these invisible placeholders, then what kind of data could ever give you real certainty about the past? The answer it gives is a totally different kind of data, testimony. It argues that the 5786-year chronology isn't a calculation at all. It's a timestamp. It's anchored to a specific historical moment, a witnessed horizon where the laws of physics were publicly shattered in front of an entire nation of people. This, it claims, is where speculation stops and the signal from a witness begins. Now get ready, because this is the heart of the testimony, and it is described in vivid, extreme detail. It talks about a thermoacoustic singularity, where the entire universe went dead silent, and then a voice blasted out with a frequency so powerful it literally shattered cedar trees.
The shockwave from this voice supposedly caused the immediate collective death of the entire nation, who were then resurrected only to die again at the second sound. The document's point is this: a nation inventing a story about its own mass death is a psychological impossibility, maybe even more impossible than the event itself. But look, a claim that intense, that cosmic, it requires an absolutely ironclad proof of transmission. So the next part of the audit tries to build a verifiable chain of custody for this national testimony, arguing that its integrity isn't based on faith, but on a formal, error-corrected protocol.
The document is very clear. This was not a game of telephone. It actually describes the transmission as a kind of ancient distributed ledger technology. The whole nation acted as decentralized nodes. A redundant teaching protocol made sure it was fault-tolerant, and the timestamp itself was secured by the daily legal need for correct dates on contracts and divorces, making a mistake a matter of civil law, not just a fuzzy memory.
So here's the crucial part: external proof. The audit argues that the best verification you can get comes from a hostile node, an enemy who has zero incentive to help you prove your story. It then points to archaeological finds like the Merneptah stele, the Tel Dan stele, and the Sennacherib prism as external proof from Egyptian, Armenian, and Assyrian sources that confirm the people, the places, and the events in the record actually existed. This exact same forensic analysis is then turned on unguided evolution, which the audit just frames as a statistical impossibility. It presents what it calls the waiting time problem. So the primate to human transition is given about 6 million years, but the audit cites simulations showing that the time needed to get just 2 coordinated mutations in a population is 216 million years. The verdict here is blunt. To call this process scientific is a mathematical absurdity. So let's see how all of this builds to the final closing argument. After presenting its entire case, the audit boils everything down to one final stark choice between two worldviews that simply cannot both be true. On one side, you have the stochastic machine, a random cosmic accident, unguided chaos, with deep time acting as a surrogate creator to make impossible odds seem plausible. On the other side, you have the directed message, a universe created functionally mature, a direct speech act from a sovereign author, and an unbreakable timestamp secured by a witnessed chain of custody. The document basically says that intellectual honesty demands you pick one. And after laying out this binary choice, the audit delivers its own, completely unambiguous verdict on the charges. On the charge of scientific validity, it finds the 13.8 billion year number to be a syntax error, not a real measurement of time, but a mathematical mirage. And on the charge of historical truth, it finds the 5786 year record to be a sovereign legal fact, a verified timestamp from a continuous civilization. And its final statement: the secular establishment is guilty of obstruction of justice against the truth. And the audit leaves us with this one final provocative thought. It completely reframes the debate, not as science versus faith, but as a choice between two types of explanations. The document's final argument is that to reject the record, you have to believe in a universal conspiracy where millions of parents for thousands of years successfully gaslit their own children. The final choice it leaves you with is this: a verified chain of custody or a schizophrenic conspiracy theory. A really powerful end to a radical re-examination of cosmic time.